Hello and welcome back to this short series of videos on Benedictine Daily Prayer, this book available from Liturgical Press and the monastic community of St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota, and edited by Maxwell Johnson, who is an ELCA, a Lutheran pastor and an oblate of St. John's Abbey, and as such is a very ecumenical resource suitable for Roman Catholic lay people with an interest in daily prayer. Last few videos we've looked at the whole structure of the office at each of the offices at the weekly Psalter, and in the last video we looked at the proper of seasons that provides all the materials that you need for the different seasons of the year, for Advent and Lent and Eastertide and so on and so forth. And now we turn in this video to the last major element, though there's plenty to explore in the future. But the last major element of using this book, which is how to incorporate the saints' days, the feasts of the year. So the liturgical year, the year of the church calendar, is filled with Sundays. Every Sunday and the days following them are celebrations of the resurrection of our Lord. The year is also filled with the seasons that orient around the major feast days of Christmas and Easter, and the preparatory seasons leading up to them, which are Advent and Lent. And then the celebratory seasons that follow after them, which is the season of Christmas into Epiphany, and the season of Easter, including the season of what used to be called Ascension Tide, the 10 days between Ascension and Pentecost. But also scattered throughout the year uh, in uh, in Christian calendars are commemorations of saints and major holy days that are not part of those seasons. They just show up on the church calendar, just in accordance with the passage of time in the calendar. And you can find a list of those saints early on in the introduction. This is on page Roman numerals are hard. 29 in the appendix, and it is the monastic calendar. And what you'll see is January, and it goes on all the way through to December, with then the days of the month, and then what sort of commemoration or what sort of saint day falls on that day. And so you'll see many, many, many days out of the year have some sort of commemoration. There are some chunks of time where there may be a few days in a row without a commemoration. March, for instance, has almost a week where there's no commemoration. But many, many days have some sort of commemoration, some sort of saint or aspect of the life of our Lord, or aspect of the life of Our Lady, Saint Mary, that is commemorated in the calendar. So today we'll be talking about how we include these aspects, these saints' days, into our pattern that we've already established by now, and maybe you've been practicing by now, of praying through the weekly Psalter in our weekly round of psalms and readings and prayers that just go through the days of the week in a 2 or 4 week cycle. So today we'll be talking about bringing these saints' observations, these commemorations, these feast days of the saints into our practice. And the basic pattern of them is, as we saw last time with the proper of seasons, I hope you noted, that the proper of seasons, back here in the proper of seasons section, that all that it is doing is providing alternative material, stuff that will fill in instead of the stuff in the weekly Psalter. So weekly Psalter, we've got Monday through Friday, weeks 1 and 3, and then Monday through Sunday in weeks 1 and 3, and then Monday through Sunday in weeks 2 and 4. But then for the seasons, when we reach Advent, there are some things from the proper seasons that are substituted for what's in the weekly Psalter. Do you remember that from our last video? And so you don't double up the content. You don't double up, for instance, the hymn for First Vespers. You would use the one from the proper seasons instead of the ones in the weekly Psalter. So there's the Psalter, and then if there's a proper seasons version of it, that stacks. It's like it replaces, it takes priority over what's in the weekly Psalter. We'll see the same principle playing out with the calendar of saints. The saints give us additional material that substitutes for what is found in the weekly Psalter. So let's have a look at back at that list of saints. I wonder if this needs to be 2 videos. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. First of all, if you take a look at the calendar, when I'm recording this, we're in early October. So I'll just have a look at early October. Here's the very beginning of October. What you see is a number of feasts. October 1st is St. Therese of the Child Jesus, Virgin, Religious, and Doctor of the Church. That's Teresa of Lisieux, if that's her proper name in religion. For the 2nd, there's a feast called the Holy Guardian Angels. For the 3rd, there's a feast of Blessed Columba Marmion Abbot. He was an English Benedictine. For the 4th, there's St. Francis of Assisi, a religious founder, and so on. What you notice in this column off to the side is that some of them say memorial, some of them say feast. Not all of them do. Some of them say memorial, some of them say feast, some of them are blank. There's nothing in the right-hand column. For instance, for Blessed Columba Marmion Abbot, there's nothing after his name. You'll also notice that anything that is labeled a feast is also printed over here in capital letters. For instance, directly above, at the end of September, St. Michael, St. Gabriel, and St. Raphael, archangels, in capital letters, is also a feast. Over here at the beginning of November, we see another kind of saint that is, or another kind of saint day that is in all capitals, and that's November 1st, the feast of all saints. And over here in the column, it doesn't say feast, it says solemnity. Solemnity, which means that it is particularly solemn. It is particularly important. So you may be gathering from seeing this. You may also be putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that, for instance, the holy guardian angels, or maybe all saints, ranks slightly more slightly higher in the ranking of importance than, say, Blessed Columba Marmion, who you've maybe never even heard of before. And this is exactly true, that there are rankings of saints' days. In fact, there are rankings of every single day in the calendar, but we're not going to get into all of that now. So right back at the beginning of the introduction that gives us the monastic calendar, it says, when no rank is given, it is an optional memorial. So here on the first page of January, for instance, we have all 4 of the ranks. We have a solemnity, the highest ranking, which is the Solemnity of Mary, Mother of God. So that's the highest ranking kind of feast. Down here on the 18th of January, we have the second highest rank, which is a feast, and that's all in capital letters, the Confession of St. Peter. Then we have several memorials. For instance, January 15th, St. Maurice and St. Placid, disciples of our Holy Father Benedict, is a memorial. And then all these ones that have nothing in that last column, for instance, St. Hilary, Bishop and Doctor of the Church, there's nothing, but we just saw in this footnote, when no rank is given, it is an optional memorial. So these are optional memorials. So that's the first thing to take note in the church calendar, that we have 4 ranks of feast days. Solemnity being the highest, then feast being the second most important, and then memorials, and then optional memorials. Now, it used to be far more complicated than that. There used to be ranks upon ranks of doubles and first class doubles and greater doubles and semi doubles and all, simple feasts, all sorts of different feasts. It was simplified around about the time of Vatican II, and it's much easier to figure out now. And in fact, it's even simpler than this. There are really only 3 levels of feast. There's solemnities, there's feasts, and there's memorials in terms of the way you use the feasts. And how, but Chris, didn't you just say that there's optional memorials as well? Yes, there are, but the only difference that an optional memorial makes is whether you decide to pay any attention to it or not. In terms of how you use it, in terms of how you honor or uh, introduce the material for the saint, it's exactly the same between a memorial between St. John Newman, Bishop memorial, and St. Raymond of Peñafort, optional memorial. It's just the only difference is that you, the user at home, in theory, you should recognize St. John Newman, but you have the choice of whether you pay any attention to St. Raymond's feast day or not. That's up to you. It's optional, it's entirely optional. But in practice, unless you're part of a community that is canonically bound to pray this in a particular way, the whole thing's optional. But uh, we'll leave that to later. How we go about that might be a good subject for a future video. How we go about deciding what our personal prayer practice is going to be. So we have solemnities, and we have feasts, and we have memorials. So now that I've introduced this basic concept of the calendar, where do we find out the specific material for each of these feasts? Well, that's where we bring in these last 2 ribbons. There's sections that, well, let me actually show you first in the table of contents. That'll help orient you, and then you can find it on your own fairly easily later. There are 2 sections that I want to draw your attention to here in the table of contents. We've already looked at the weekly Psalter and the ordinary. We've looked at the festival Psalter because we needed that for some of the proper of seasons. That's just a separate version of the weekly Psalter, that certain days, certain feast days will say, today, pull all of your Psalms not from, say, Wednesday of week 3, but pull them instead from the festival Psalter because today is a feast. So you're going to use the Psalms from the festival Psalter. But today I want to draw your attention to 2 places. The first is this chunk of chapters called the Commons, common for feasts of the Blessed Virgin Mary, common for feasts of the Apostles, common for feasts of martyrs, common for feasts of holy men and women. So that's the first chunk to pay attention to, beginning on page 1237. So you can put a ribbon there. I've put my cream colored ribbon there, getting ready for this video. The second place where I want to draw your attention is the section called the Proper of the Saints on page 1617. So 1 ribbon, please, goes in the Common for Feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary, page 1237. You can put your last ribbon, your reddish colored ribbon, at the beginning of the Proper of the Saints on page 1617. All right, so let's dive into it. Now, we've already run into the term proper because we heard about the proper of seasons, which is material, prayers and hymns and readings and antiphons and things that are proper, that are appropriate, that are applicable to a particular season. So the section of the proper of the saints, by now logically, I hope you see that this is going to be material that is proper, appropriate, applicable to individual saints' commemorations. So all those days that we saw in our calendar just now, we'll find specific material for those in 1617. But what we'll find in the proper of the saints is that again and again, this section, the proper of the saints section, will refer to material that we pull from one of these four commons. And that's our clue in the fact that these are all titled common. This whole section is called the commons. This is all material that is common to certain categories of feasts, certain categories of saints' days, material that is reused, that is shared by all the saints or all the festivals that have a particular category. So, for instance, there are many apostles that are in our calendar of saints. There are many martyrs in that calendar of saints. And instead of just repeating all the same antiphons or hymns or something, instead of repeating the same hymn over and over again for every single martyr, they say, for this martyr, just like you do for every other martyr, go to the common for feasts of martyrs and pull the generic martyr hymn out of the common section and use that. So we'll actually take a look at the proper of saints in the common in just a minute. But while we're here on the table of contents, you've seen from the last videos that we're constantly bouncing back and forth between the ordinary, the overall framework of the prayers, and then the weekly Psalter, which contains the Psalms, the antiphons, very often hymns and short readings, intercessory prayers, collects, which are concluding prayers. So we're constantly bouncing back and forth between the ordinary and a particular day of the week from the weekly Psalter. When we start bringing in material from the feasts, the common for the feasts, and the proper of saints, we will be flipping back and forth between all four of those sections. And if we are reading from matins, if the office we're using is matins, the first one, or vigils, the first one of the day, we'll also be using the Sunday and weekday readings. So there may come a point, my friends, when you start to introduce saints into all this, where you're going to be flipping back and forth between all your ribbons, and it may feel overwhelming and confusing at first, but stick with it. Take your time. Nobody is rushing you. Once you reach the end of a hymn, for instance, you can take a moment to figure out whether you're supposed to be pulling an antiphon from that section or from that section, a reading from that section or that section. There's no rush. It's all time spent with you and God, and it's a skill that you will develop over time. So let's actually turn to the proper of the saints. Maybe what we'll do in this video is we'll just get to the proper of the saints and have a look at the commons. And then in the next video, we'll talk about the difference liturgically, the difference in the worship expression between memorials / optional memorials, feasts, and solemnities. Yeah, because we're already at 19 minutes in this video, and I don't want to overwhelm you. So the Proper of Saints starts here on page 1617, and what this is it just goes right through the calendar, but it begins the calendar on November 30th. Now that other calendar we looked at in the front, as well as our secular calendars at home, they always begin on January 1st, right? That's the New Year. That's the beginning of the year. But in the Western Christian church calendar, so the calendar of the Latin half of the church that became Roman Catholicism, and by extension has become the one that influences all of the Protestant churches. The calendar begins on November 30th, because that's basically like just before Advent begins, and Advent is the beginning of the church year. So the Feast of St. Andrew is always the first feast listed, because that's November 30th. And right at the end, as we flip all the way to the end of the proper of the saints, that'll take us all the way through to the end of November 26th. Not quite November 30th, but it just means that um, there aren't any feast days between November 26th and November 30th. So, November 30th, St. Andrew, we're told that he's an apostle, and we're told that this is a feast. That's all useful information. And then it says you'll be using the common for feasts of the apostles. Right? And then it gives you some material. We'll look at that material in this next video. But we'll just crack on and take a look at the next, at a memorial. All right, the December the 3rd, the very next commemoration in our proper of the saints after St. Andrew is December 3rd, St. Francis Xavier, who was a Jesuit who went out to Asia and did a lot of work out there and eventually died. He's a presbyter, which is a fancy word for a priest. And this is a memorial. So that's the rank of this feast, that it's a memorial. And here we will be using the common of holy men and women. So every commemoration that's in here, every saint has a common that matches up to it. Does that begin to show you how we're going to be knitting together specific informations from the saint with generic, presbyter who has died and is holy material from the common of holy men and women? And then we'll also be mixing that together with the weekly Psalter and with the ordinary and building the office as we go. So there's the memorial. Let's see, December 4th is St. John of Damascus, presbyter and doctor of the church. Doctor of the church just means a teacher, somebody who's not a medical physician, but somebody who is a doctor, one who teaches. Um, so a saint who has whose teachings are thought to be of universal value, not just within the Roman Catholic world, but to the whole of the Christian family, that their teachings are like that they manage to express something core and central to the faith. So St. John of Damascus is one of those, and he is an optional memorial. And again, the common of holy men and women. So let's see, we found a feast, we found an optional memorial, and we found uh, a memorial. Let's try and find a solemnity, shall we? There's one right here, December 8th. I knew there was one coming up. Um, and that is December 8th, the feast of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which is a solemnity. And for this, we'll be using the common for the Blessed Virgin Mary. Our Lady is so important, especially in Benedictine monastic spirituality. Mary is accorded very high regard. Um, as indeed, in my opinion, she should be by all Christians because she's our Lord's mama, and she always points us towards her Son. Um, so December 8th is the solemnity, the highest rank of a feast day of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. And so, as a solemnity, a higher ranking feast, you would expect that there would be more specific material given because it's a bigger deal. It's a bigger deal, and so you'll see much closer to what appears to be a full set of materials, readings for the whole of vigils, special antiphons for the Psalms, all sorts of extra stuff. So that is basically it all the way through the rest of the Proper of Saints We've seen all four of the categories: memorials, optional memorials, which once again are the same as a memorial in terms of how you use the material in here. The only difference is that an optional memorial is something that you have the option of ignoring. You can, if you want to, just say it's an optional memorial. I don't care about that saint. Um, I choose to ignore it. While a memorial, like St. Mary Magdalene here, July 22nd, technically, if you're being if you're following the rules, you have to recognize, you have to at least mention St. Mary on St. Mary Magdalene on her feast day. Um, it's just nice to do that. So let's. I mean, you've seen the whole of the Proper of Saints now, but I'm just going to bring it on up to where I am today as I'm recording this. It's October 9th. Saint Denis, bishop and martyr, and his companions, martyrs. And not surprisingly, the common that is linked to this is the common of martyrs. So, because we have four different commons, which we're going to look at right now, and those are the commons of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which is just used for feasts of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Um, Common for feasts of apostles. Then there's the common for feasts of martyrs, special material for those who are martyrs. And then, sort of as a generic catch-all for everyone else, is the common for feasts of holy men and women, which will include, popes, priests, nuns, laywomen, kings, um, abbots, all kinds of additional holy people. Now, in some other versions of these liturgy of the hours or breviaries, there will be additional commons that provide a wider range of options. But this book, they're struggling to keep this at 2,000 pages, so they could only go so far with it. Um, so let's kind of wrap that up for now. We can say one more thing, I suppose. That if you take a look at one of the commons, let's look at the common for apostles. No, let's look at the common for martyrs. Common for feasts and martyrs. Just the last kind of thing we'll say about this. But if you can compare the common for feasts of martyrs, which begins on page 1257, with any of the seasons in the proper of seasons, or you compare one of these commons to something that's found in the weekly Psalter, what you'll see is that it's it should seem familiar, by which I mean what you saw in the proper seasons is that when you reach a season, if you reach, the season of Lent or something, what you're getting is a substitute invitatory anthem antiphon that goes along with Psalm 94. What you're getting is a substitute hymn. And what you're getting is substitute readings. And that's exactly the same as what you're getting for the Feasts of Martyrs. So the only thing that you need to figure out, and we'll do this in the next video, is which elements get substituted. Because basically, the higher the rank, the more stuff gets substituted in. For a memorial, there might just be a hymn and maybe just a prayer that gets brought in, substituted for what's in the weekly Psalter. For a feast, different things get substituted, including the whole set of psalms that get used. For a solemnity, practically everything is substituted. So it really just all has to do with how much of the saint's day, the material about the saint, how much of it leaks into and overlaps the regular weekday in our weekly Psalter. So That's what we'll talk about in our next session. You can just now have a look at the common for feasts of apostles and the Blessed Virgin Mary and martyrs and holy men and women, and begin to take a look through the proper of saints towards the back, and just familiarize yourself with those. Just familiarize yourself with those. In our next video, we will talk about the differences between solemnities and feasts and memorials and optional memorials, and how big an impact those have on the weekly Psalter. But by now, before we plunge into that, I hope you have at least a reasonable level of comfort with the ordinary and with the weekly Psalter, and that you've basically figured out the pattern of when you're flipping between the ordinary. Maybe this is what you can do. Just take a pen and a piece of paper and sketch out the items for each of the offices, not the contents of it, but just what you find in it. Here's the antiphon with the invitatory, and then here's a hymn, and then here's the Psalms with their antiphons, and then here are readings, and then sometimes we end with the Te Deum or the Te Desit Laus, um, and just kind of make a little map of the contents, the structure of each of the offices. You can pull that from the ordinary. So sketch that down on a piece of paper, and then it'll be easier once you start to figure out which bits come from the weekly Psalter and which bits we're going to start pulling from the common and from the proper of saints, because it can sometimes start to feel a little overwhelming with all your ribbon flipping. That's why they give us these ribbons, though, so that we can make it very easy to flip back and forth between one section and the next. So before you know it, you'll be cutting and pasting as you go, and knowing right where to go. But for right now, you're probably going to feel a little overwhelmed. That's okay. That's okay. Um, you're starting out with a new skill. So keep at it. I'm very proud of you. And all of it is bringing you step by step deeper into a skill that will bring you, along with millions of Christians, of monks and nuns and oblates and people drawn to this life of prayer, into a contemplative, daily, um, enriching encounter with the living God. So that's all for now. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for your patience and for putting up with all of these videos. Now, if you've watched all of these videos, you've put in uh, I don't know, like 3.5 hours of your time with me babbling on about this. So thank you for your patience, and keep on dropping me notes and questions, and I'll do my best to keep on being helpful. God bless you. Pray for me, and I will continue to hold you in my prayers. Bye for now. See you next time.